Welcome to the Unexpected Cosmology, and thank you for watching. I ask that you consider supporting my research and work here at the Unexpected Cosmology, and one of the ways you can do that is by visiting the bookstore on my website. We have some delightful reads available. And then there is the matter of getting in touch with many other like minded individuals. You may want to consider joining our Discord community. We meet throughout the week, including every Sabbath. Like, subscribe, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Write me privately if you'd prefer. I'd love to hear from you. Shalom. All right, shalom, everyone, and welcome to the Unexpected Cosmology. I'm going to get right to this tonight. I am going over a paper that I published about a year ago now. This is called Superman's Curse: The George Reeves Murder Suicide Was a Hoax. And ever since putting this out there, it hasn't really gotten a lot of traction, and partly because a lot of people don't know who George Reeves is, which is really surprising to me. George Reeves was Superman in the 1950s. He was on a very popular TV show, which was run by Desilu Studios of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. And I got into George Reeves Superman probably back in the early 90s when Nick at Night started showing the reruns. And my dad had watched the show as a child in the 1950s. It was really deeply personal to him. So it was a way that I connected with him. And for those of you who don't know, I would assume that everybody has heard the phrase, uh, "the curse of Superman" or "Superman's curse." Well, it started with George Reeves, and so again, a lot of people they know about this so-called curse of Superman. They don't know where it came from, and I'm going to be showing tonight that this is it's just another intel psyop. It's ridiculous. The entire narrative it doesn't make sense. It's a bunch of different pieces that like these breadcrumb trails that lead to nowhere, just as they're always set up to be so. To really leave people guessing and looking into it for decades later and never able to solve anything. So let's get right into it. Here it is: Superman's Curse. The George Reeves murder suicide was a hoax by yours truly, Noel Joshua Hadley. And oh, I didn't put a date on it. That's okay. A shot rang out. In the home of actor George Reeves, people frantically handed somebody else their martini glass and then tried to wake the naked couple in bed, though the police wouldn't be called for nearly an hour. Earlier that evening, Reeves and his fiancee had gotten into an argument at a restaurant or two, and despite planning to wed in only 4 days' time, Reeves reportedly wanted out of the arrangement. Dodge that bullet. Too soon. Within the matter of hours, the Superman actor would be reported dead. Undoubtedly, the biggest news story of 1959 in the schoolyard sandbox, toppling even the cancellation of the Mickey Mouse Club. Mickey Mouse Club was canceled that year, just so you know. For the following 60 plus years, the evening plays out like a game of Clue. Who done it? Precisely as it was designed to. Ask any room for a show of hands, and there will likely be a split decision between George Reeves being the victim of murder and the other half claiming suicide. But as you've hopefully deduced by now, I'm claiming neither. Go ahead, pick your favorite scenario. The murder suicide of George Reeves was a hoax. From what I've been able to gather on the internet, I'm the first to make the claim, which is surprising. How is it that nobody else has put the two and two together? George Reeves was simply cast into the latest movie. You likely already know its title, The Curse of Superman. If you're new around here and prone to have a hissy fit at the mere suggestion that Reeves flying out of his bedroom window on wires is more believable than the official narrative, just know this isn't my first throwdown in the ring. Eventually, you sit in the audience at the magic show and strain your eyes long enough to catch the wizard's sleight of hand. Afterwards, you'll never be fooled by the same trick again. But that is only if you choose to see it. Most won't. Our slave masters know that people show up at the magic show because they want to be fooled. Try standing up during the middle of the performance and flailing your hands back and forth in order to warn the crowd of their deception. I've looked into the abyss, and I know what I'm dealing with. The abyss has heavy set eyes that stares back. But look at me getting all dark and ominous with you. Why are we talking about the bottomless pit when the murder suicide hoax of George Reeves needs tended to? As we should expect with the Hollywood hoax production, it was one of the sloppiest investigations ever. No surprise. How sloppy was it, you ask? No photos of the crime scene have ever been found. The gun was never checked for fingerprints. Reeves' body was embalmed before the autopsy was performed. You could just check this stuff all off on the box. And the police threw his blood-stained sheets in the washer. Oh dear. We we are told it was performed in the manner that it was in order, or let me repeat that. We are told it was performed in the manner that it was in order for Hollywood execs to protect their celebrities. That's certainly one way to put it. Oh, George Reeves needed protected, all right. He needed to go unidentified all the way to retirement, maybe even reassignment. I don't know. Your probable first thought is why they would do something like that. Only pretend to kill the Man of Steel, that is. It's questions like that which help me to identify who's the new person around here. Rookie mistake, but that's okay. For past, present, and future discussions, you want to become familiar with the word psychodrama. Say it with me, psychodrama. Again, psychodrama. Anyone intimate with my work will gladly tell you that psychodrama is real magic, or at least that Noel Joshua Hadley advocates it so, not the fake stuff they sell you in Shakespearean plays. Except the irony here is that it's strictly reserved to the world stage. You may have heard of performance witchcraft before. Same thing. That's what a psychodrama essentially is. You are told something terrible happened by your handlers, and now you are expected to survive the outcome, or in the very least, grapple with its implications. That's how the alchemy does its work. The catch being that you are sold on an illusion. The illusion itself, as the stage performance suggests, is key to the casting of the spell. Case in point, the Zionist media had just devoted an entire decade to convincing millions of baby boomer children that Superman was faster than a speeding bullet. On the morning of June 16th, they woke up to learn that he'd chosen a bullet of all things to end it. You figure taking a plunge off the Colorado Street Bridge was probably another discussed scenario, as he would have failed to stick the landing after the latest flying segment. Here we see a devastated child identified as a certain Charlie Kiphart, age 7, of 2225 Berkeley Avenue. You can easily find the house on a map. It's just blocks away from Elysian Park and Dodger Stadium. Just look at that newspaper headline: TV Superman out of work, kills self. Psychodrama. Don't believe everything you read in Ink, kid. Why would newspapers run the story that George Reeves was out of work? That's fake news. The tabloids were fully aware that the adventures of Superman had been picked up for another entire season, maybe even two, at least 26 more episodes. Included in the deal was a proposed tour of Australia and possibly even Japan. That's how popular that show was. They were so determined to get something off the ground that a spin-off show starring the fictional character Jimmy Olsen, complete with stock footage of Reeves, was considered. For the remainder of the century, The Adventures of Superman ranked only behind I Love Lucy in syndication. The crew down at Desilu Studios realized they had made a mistake in canceling a good thing and were bringing it back for another run. But even its cancellation and resurgence was probably planned as part of the psyop. The press had already decided on the suicide scenario before the police investigation, as if that's not suspicious. Children already knew the show was canceled, and the media wasn't interested in lifting the illusion. Notice, if you haven't already, it wasn't George Reeves who died, but Superman. Sorry, kids. Big Daddy was so depressed that he couldn't be there for you, flying through millions of television sets as your artificial babysitter, that he decided to end it all. Because nobody is going to make Superman bleed his own blood but himself. You will tell me the reason is that he was weary of being typecast. Sure, let's go with that. Having more invites than Howdy Doody and Bozo the Clown to every child's birthday party in America sucks, I suppose. Apparently, a rotunda of women hoping to swoon over him in big red boots and a cape and then do his laundry to, check and see if he was simultaneously the man of stainless steel underneath, no longer got it up for him, as leaping over tall buildings in a single bound goes. You think Captain Kangaroo ever had it so good? How did Slim Goodbody ever manage to pull it off? Look, I get it. Playing the Zionist Messiah can become a bore. You figure even the actual Zionist Messiah, once the Illuminati are searching to pull his arrival off beyond the television, though he may never get past the television, will tire of his role from time to time. Best for Reeves to retire in America. I screwed that one up. Best for Reeves to retire in South America. Kick back a couple of cold ones with Hitler while the aging Führer's health is still good. Just to show us how suicidal he truly was, George Reeves posed for a series of photos within days of his death, and they all do this. Amazing. How many days before Operation Flappy Cape went live? Less than a week. If you read my series of papers on the Manson murder hoax, then you recall that Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring did the very thing. Here we see George hanging out front of his 1579 Benedict Canyon home. Good looking door, if ever I've seen one. Standing exactly as we'd expect of a happy man, I suppose, whenever entering and leaving the very home that had already been bought and paid for by the wife of an MGM film studio executive and producer. But we'll get to that in a few. An even happier photo was taken on the driveway with his 1959 Oldsmobile. This is not your father's Oldsmobile. Fresh plates. Look closely. That's a temporary license. He just bought it. They certainly don't make them like they used to. Your father's Oldsmobile probably never looked that good either. Yeah, that's a man who was going places in style, not suicidal. Going where exactly? How about Desilu Studios and another 26 episodes for starters? The happiest photo of all has George proudly showing off his gun collection inside the home. Apparently, the black button up shirt and gray slacks were too casual for a depressed and out of work actor, as he's committed to a costume change. Same photo session, though. I might as well point out that George Reeves' last photo session was taken by this guy. Among other films, Billy C.A. was a former child actor who had appeared in Our Gang before it became known as The Little Rascals. Here, I'll turn this off. All right. There was a hot mic there. I had to turn that off. Let me repeat that again. Among other films, Billy C.A. was a former child actor who had appeared in Our Gang before it became known as The Little Rascals. He looks a lot like Alfalfa, doesn't he? But he's not. Not exactly a bombshell breadcrumb, but he was still an actor. The Hollywood gears were in motion while Reeves leaned over his Oldsmobile to say cheese, and CA was standing on the set. Therefore, I'm putting this out there because you never really know. If Billy CA was indeed in the know and not just hired on the go, then we're likely to run into the former child actor at some other psyop because guys all swim in the same circle. And now we turn to a happy photo of a proud and happy man drinking his beloved brandy, the gentleman's baby bottle. Its label reads Stock 84, not too shabby. Still part of the Billy CA photo session. Suicide is looking less and less likely of an option, ain't it? A man doesn't show off his guns like that only to routinely guide the cold barrel of a stashed Luger toward his forehead. And besides, you think a bullet through the mouth is the sure way to end it. Hollywood actor Jim Beaver has been talking up his George Reeves biography for some time now, still unpublished as of this writing. Maybe it was published in the last year, I don't know. Apparently, he talked to one witness who claimed that Reeves would get so sloshed at home parties that he'd shoot men's hats off. Oh dear. Did he first make them stand in front of a haystack and bullseye, or are we expected to believe the walls somehow managed to swallow up the bullet holes? Where's a tabloid reporter when you really need him? That's just conveniently placed misinformation to paint Reeves in the strokes of an irresponsible gun owner and open up the suicide option. Art Wiseman was Reeves' personal assistant. He later told Geraldo Rivera, I know, that George, quote, was not a believer in live ammunition in those guns in the house because there had been parties in the house before, and he didn't like the idea of anybody picking up a gun and saying bang. And so the fact that there was live ammunition in one of the guns is a problem for me to accept, unquote. So it was murder then, you will tell me. No, it wasn't. Art Wiseman was maybe insinuating murder, but Reeves' inner circle of friends are only divided in opinion down the middle because the narrative was set up for both options. What are the chances that George Reeves lived just down the street from the 10500 CeeLo Drive home? That's where the Sharon Tate murder was staged in as little as a decade. Nope, not a coincidence. From there, the Lookout Mountain U.S. Air Force movie studio, where the atomic bomb footage was produced, was just a hop and a skip away. Make a note of Bill Bliss's residence a little further up the lane. We might as well call this bird's eye view of the Earth Spook Street, because that is what it is. When you learn more about the person, or rather the people, who provided Reeves his living accommodations, you too will see that his murder suicide was yet another intel operation, like the Mansons, and that it had long been planned. On second thought, why delay the inevitable? The woman who paid for the house at 1579 Benedict Canyon Drive and then allowed George Reeves to move on in, free of rent, was Toni Mannix. She was born Camille Bernice Frumis, but then became a Ziegfeld Follies showgirl under the alias Tony Lanier. You will recall that Lucille Ball attempted to make the cut as a Ziegfeld girl, but according to the official narrative, was fired in 1932 at the age of 16. Sometime in the 1930s, and while still a Ziegfeld girl, Lanier became the mistress of MGM's general manager, Eddie Mannix. Ah, our next clue. She finally took on the name Mannix, but not until their marriage in 1951, well over a decade later. Her 10-year affair with George Reeves began in 1948, some 3 years before putting a ring on it. Over the course of the following decade, she would shower Reeves with expensive gifts. Eddie Maddox clearly didn't mind, as he not only consented to her boy toys and the necessary toys for those playthings, but according to The Guardian, he and his own mistresses, excuse me, often went on double dates with George and Tony. And when they traveled, it was Maddox's in first class, sexual playthings, and coach. Eddie Mannix, there he is. Yes, indeed, Eddie Mannix, presenting Desilu with a key, a giant key. What sort of door might that key open? We are not told. Probably congratulating them on their televised alchemy from one Ziegfeld handler to another. I suppose that would be depressing, banging the wife of a Hollywood executive he approves and never getting while he approves and never getting cast into any of his MGM movies. Wink wink. How anyone is incapable of seeing that Reeves was being groomed for the big day is beyond me. Eddie Mannix, you see, wasn't simply a producer. The man from Jersey was a Hollywood fixer. So you can see here, I don't know if I want to read this whole thing. Let's see. This comes from Wikipedia. Joseph Edgar Allen John Eddie Mannix. That is a long name. Let me read that again. Joseph Edgar Allen John Eddie Mannix. I would say never trust anyone with more than a first, middle, and last name. I think he's got about one, two, three, four, five, six there. Was an American film studio executive and producer. He is remembered for his work as a quote unquote fixer. This comes from the wiki, who was paid to cover up Hollywood stars' often colorful private lives to protect their public image and profitability for the studio. Among his and if they're telling you this, just imagine what they're not telling you. Among his most lasting contributions to Hollywood was a ledger he maintained that lists the cost and revenues of every MGM film produced between 1924 and 1962, an important reference for film historians. You see, it says right here, even the Wikipedia admits it. I bet you didn't know that MGM had its very own special services department, quote unquote. Well, it did. As head of the public image publicity wing of the filmmaking industry, Maddox was paid to disguise details of the colorful private lives which contracted luminaries often flaunted indiscriminately. Sounds like thinly disguised intel work to me, but that's probably none of my business. Officially, though, when a star was in trouble, they knew who to call. It was Eddie Maddox who took care of them, solved their problems, told them what they could and could not say to the press, hid their crimes. You know, the big boy stuff that went beyond the expertise of their usual day to day handler. Remember when Paul Byrne, husband of MGM's biggest star, Jean Harlow, was murdered? Maddox was on top of it. MGM star Judy Garland's drug addictions, not a problem. The murder of Ted Healy, creator of the Three Stooges, on it. An unmarried Loretta Young is found with child, and a very married Clark Gable is the father. Call Mannix. He'll have the press convincing everyone that Young is simply adopting someone else's kid. So clever of him. The Wikipedia sums up Mannix as follows. During his career as a studio fixer at MGM, Maddox allegedly left a trail of secret abortions, sham marriages, and several other unsolved homicides in his wake. Oh dear. Are you telling me there were fake marriages in Hollywood and the television and media said otherwise? Say it ain't so. In order to pull off the illusion, Maddox would need a complex web of contacts at his constant disposal. Scumbags from under back alley rock. There was, of course, the constant butt kissing to Louis B. Mayer, but then consider the reporters and doctors, as well as politicians and the police needed for his day to day projects. Exactly. Intel. Why do I get the feeling that Mannix could just as easily create scandal? You know, like those unsolved murders? Make somebody go away for the purposes of public image. This week it's a car wreck. Last month it was a plane crash. Just tell them he took a bullet to the skull and let everybody grovel for a cause. Murder or suicide. That's the fun part, as they'll never even think to question the bullet. It's a psychodrama thing. The Yoko Ono of this story is New York socialite Leonore Lemon. She is described to us as a reputed gold digger with a volatile temper. A playgirl was at one time infamous in New York as the only woman ever tossed out of the Stork Club for fist fighting. Also, an actress. Before meeting George, she was married to a Vanderbilt, specifically Vanderbilt heir J. Vanderbilt Webb. We've already taken a look at the Vanderbilt courtroom drama in my Shirley Temple paper, and the conclusion is a unanimous one. The Vanderbilts were media spooks. And just quick reference here that Anderson Cooper of CNN is a Vanderbilt. Upon their meeting in 1958, George Reeves apparently took a liking to her as he promptly dumped Tony Maddox. Poor girl. The nerve of Reeves, after buying him a house and everything. She must have been crushed, devastated, I tell you. Reeves' inside circle of friends would later recount how he enthusiastically claimed Lemon made him feel young again, despite observations that the couple had a tumultuous relationship, arguing frequently. Probably no manipulation there. The picture being formed for us is that Reeves was a fool for letting a New York girl with obvious mob connections get the better of him. That's adorable and all, but Lemon was likely arranged by Mr. and Mrs. Mannix from the very beginning. All we're witnessing here is the trade off from one handler to another. We'll just call Lemon another boy toy gift. The only difference here is that Mannix needed to cover her tracks and let somebody else get the publicity while a search and fixer did the heavy lifting. Fun fact: Reeves and Lemon met at Toots Shores restaurant at 51 West 51st Street in New York City. Why that little detail is so often repeated probably has something to do with the person's Toots Shore. For starters, he was an Ashkenazi Jew, but that's probably unimportant, I'm sure. Here's how the Wikipedia describes him. Bernard Toots Shore was best known as the proprietor proprietor of a legendary saloon and restaurant, Toots Shore's Restaurant in Manhattan. He ran three establishments under that name, but his first and most renowned was located at 51 West 51st Street. He was known as a saloon keeper, friend, and confidant to some of New York's biggest celebrities during that era. Did you catch that? He was confident to some of New York's biggest celebrities during that era. I bet you'd like to know who. The Wikipedia goes on to list several of them, and as you can probably already guess, they're all spooks. Charlie Chaplin, Frank Sinatra, Jackie Gleason, Louis B. Mayer. Keep scrolling on down the article, and they save the best for last. Chief Justice and 33-degree Freemason Earl Warren is counted among them. Not only that, but Toots also considered Warren to be one of his quote unquote closest friends. Yes, that Warren, the same Warren who led the Warren Commission. If you need a refresher on your Illuminati history, the Warren Commission had something to do with the assassination of JFK. Oh, the tangled web we weave. In conclusion, Toots Shore was unimportant and probably a nobody. I have included a few pictures of Toots hanging out with the usual suspects. Joe DiMaggio, Muhammad Ali, Marilyn Monroe is looking like her casual self, a cardboard cutout. And then, as formerly mentioned, we see Toots laughing it up with Sinatra and Gleason. As Obi-Wan Kenobi once stated of the Moss Eisley Cantina, you will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. But also, most of the best fire freighter pilots are to be found here. Only watch your step. Last but not least, we have Toots sandwiched in between Earl Warren and journalist Bob Considine. The picture is for sale on Getty Images for $499 if you're interested. Included in George Reeves' love struck delirium is the fact that he and Lemon were engaged soon after their quote unquote meeting at Toots. Adding insult to injury, Lemon quickly moved into the very house that Mannix had purchased for him. We are then told how Maddox was so devastated by the recent turn of events that Reeves had to file for a restraining order. Oh dear. Blame the fact that I've pulled back too many curtains, but all I'm seeing is the ongoing conflict between a slave and his handler. Or in Emperor Palpatine terms, everything that has transpired has done so according to my design. Boahaha. And it's, just quick note here on so many of these papers. I'm working on a Jim Morrison piece now, and time again, you see the women coming in to be their handlers and just basically, running their lives, telling them who they can see, who they can't see, and what their hairstyle is going to be like, everything. According to the unredacted, Reeves himself was convinced it was Maddox behind a string of strange incidents that had befallen him in the aftermath of their breakup. He was inundated with menacing silent phone calls at all hours of the morning, and someone even abducted his beloved dog, Sam. Yeah. If it walks like somebody's handler and makes phone calls like somebody's handler and then kidnaps dogs like somebody's handler. But if that's not MK Ultra enough for you, there's the matter of the car crash. Yes, there was a car crash. He was driving a 1957 Jaguar XK140 Roadster when, on April 8th, 1959, shortly after midnight, George Reeves was driving home and lost control of his car and crashed into something. The 57 Jag was capable of hauling ass at 120 to 125 miles per hour, 0 to 60 in 8.4 to 9 seconds. Impressive. Reeves spent anywhere from 5 to 7 days in the hospital, receiving as many as 27 stitches before being released. You will tell me that is proof that he was in an automobile accident and nothing more. Nope. More MK Ultra trauma training, funny business, if you ask me. It happened some 2 months prior to his run in with the bullet. In other news, George was drunk, and his mechanic reported a few years later that the brake lines had been cut. Still writing Superman scripts, are we? Hmm? The site of the accident happened in Benedict Canyon Drive, just down the street from his home. More evidence that he was driving home and simply landed in an accident, you'll tell me. Wrong again. As already mentioned, Benedict Canyon is spook central. The best sort of intel psyops are executed in a quarantine area. Even the neighbors from Easton Drive who helped him at the crash site were probably one of them. Wait, Easton Drive? Isn't that where Bill Bliss lived? He did. We simply haven't gotten to him yet. His last meal was eaten at the Scandia restaurant, located at the time on the corners of Sunset Boulevard and Doheny Avenue. Actually, George Reeves had two last meals on the evening of June 15th, as he had later arrived at Paul's Steakhouse, then existing on the corners of Burton Way and Doheny Drive. Are we expected to believe that Scandia left George Reeves with an unfulfilled appetite? Scandia is described to us as an extravagant global cuisine spots. Hope those small global portions didn't cost him much. Multiple takes from the same movie, I guess. Couldn't decide on which meal to go with for the final edit. Reeves and Lemon were apparently scheduled to marry on June 19th, only 4 days away, with a honeymoon afterwards in Tijuana. At both locations, there were witnesses who heard them arguing about it. We are often told Reeves was calling the whole thing off. Must be murder then. But by whom? So many women scorned. Perhaps Reeves was simply telling his handler that she wasn't allowed to follow him into retirement after their invite only suicide murder party. Who really knows? Then again, Tijuana may have simply been a code word for another meeting point entirely. Really, if you've been following, it's complicated. Somebody named Merrill Sparks was the piano player at Paul's. He later recalled seeing George and Leonore arriving for dinner, and that afterwards, Leonore was chatting it up with various people and getting free drinks in return. George sat alone at the piano bar, listening to Sparks' fingerwork. Does that sound like an engaged couple to you? Accordingly, Reeves was completely composed and immaculately dressed and in a retrospective mood while Leonore entertained the bar patrons, probably quietly contemplating his future in Argentina. Space is fake, but given that fictional scenario, if I were an astronaut and this was my last night on planet Earth, I'd probably do the same thing. Find a piano player and a glass of brandy and stare off into a blank wall while my handler entertained the guest. Good times. It was during his break, Sparks figured around 9:30 p.m., that he observed Reeves and Lemon waiting out front of their car, arguing. How he could have possibly honed in on such intimate details, such as Lemon insisting that she get hitched in Baja, only seems to infer that the two were going out of their way, literally two separate locations, to make their little backstory known. Hey, everybody, we're arguing. We're going to get married on June 19th, only 4 days from now, in another country. We're leaving, and we're in disharmony over that decision. It would be a total shame if something bad happened between tonight and then. Ah, now I see. Making your backstory known at only one restaurant isn't a very good insurance policy, as alibis go. Better make it two. They were then observed leaving Paul's together, but where to? More food salvaging? No, just wrestling. Lemon stated in interviews with Jim Beaver that they attended a wrestling match involving Reeves' friend Jean LaBelle. The Wikipedia lists LaBelle as an actor who appeared in 1,000 films and television shows. I would say this was one of them, but LaBelle never had any recollections of having seen Reeves after the workout session earlier that day. Oops. Reeves' agent neglected to hand the script off to LaBelle's agent. Meanwhile, the unhappy couple drove off somewhere other than home. Must have had a last minute meeting with their booking agent. I get it. Can't blame them. Tensions were high. When it comes to these murder mysteries, you only get so many takes. Here is the last picture taken of George and Leonore together. We are told it is 1 week before his suicide murder. I don't know. Tell me the tell me the look on Georgie Porgy Darling's face isn't suspicious. He knows what's up. They both do. Anywho, the story goes that George Reeves and Leonore Lemon finally returned to their 1579 Benedict Canyon Drive home after a quote unquote wrestling match, or someplace else entirely never made known to us, probably unimportant, and that Reeves retired alone for the evening, needing his beauty sleep. Somebody named Robert Condon was staying as a house guest, and so too decided to retire into his room. Condon was a ghostwriter, currently taking the autobiography of prizefighter Archie Moore to the typewriter. How good of a ghostwriter was he? I can't find a single picture of him on the internet. Can't claim him to be an undedicated ghostwriter, that's for sure. Let me repeat that. I can't find a single picture of him on the internet. Can't claim him to be an uneducated ghostwriter, that's for sure. It's all on how you read it. As a semi regular restaurant patron, I wouldn't know the first thing about spotting a ghostwriter in the room. But that's not what happened on the night of Superman's suicide murder. Condon was observed by other patrons hopping with the couple. Oh, look, it's Superman with Bobby Condon, the ghostwriter. I loved his latest ghost novel about J. Edgar Hoover being a crossdresser. So edgy. Again, who is Bobby Condon? Where's a picture of him? And what has he ever written? We are told the book he was writing at the time was finally released with the title The Archie Moore Story as Told to Bob Condon. But I can't find any record of it having existed. On eBay, nothing. I even paused everything a moment ago to visit the Library of Congress website, and this Bob Condon fellow is really playing hard to get. The top title that Congress fired back at me was a book by Bob Hope. Are they trying to tell me something? Was Bobby Condon really Bob Hope? And was Hope in on the joke? Why would anyone include, quote, as told to Bob Condon in the title of a book if nobody knows who he is? It's okay. You can say it. Spoo oo oo ook. Reeves was an experienced actor and knew a thing or two about having the people from the writer's room handy in case of last minute rewrites. Meanwhile, Lemon decided to just hang around in the living room while Superman and the ghostliest ghostwriter of all time retired separately, I guess. Perhaps waiting for someone to walk through the front door because when it comes to the residents of Benedict Canyon, you never really know. Surprise, surprise. Somebody did happen to walk through the front door. 33-year-old Carol Van Ronkel of 2300 Benedict Canyon Drive showed up on the front porch at 1 a.m. wearing only a nightgown. So, your basic late night in the Hollywood Hills, then. Van Ronkel was the happy wife of another Hollywood scriptwriter, a certain Alfred von Ronkel. His scriptwriting credits include Destination Moon and Destination Space. So you know those two were in deep. We are told Van Ronkel arrived hoping to disrupt the local ghostwriting celebrity Bobby Condon from his nighty night regimen and that her husband was left unaware. But that it was no big deal because she lived in the neighborhood, quote unquote. There's an old saying in my household that if you the wife want to grab the man's attention, be sure to stand naked in front of the television while the golf tournament is on. That usually works 11 out of 10 times. I'm sure Alfred didn't notice in the least that his wife was taking their dog or whatever on a walk through the dark canyon in her undies while he remained behind at the typewriter fleshing out his latest NASA propaganda piece. Sometimes we just have to go with these things, and this is one such occasion. Then again, Van Ronkel wasn't the only person to conveniently show up moments before the gunshot heard around the world. We finally get to him. The man, the myth. William Bliss was driving down the street when he noticed that Reeves' porch light was on and decided to ring the doorbell, hoping to partay. Sure, let's go with that and pretend like Reeves never turned his porch light on during any other night of the week. Nobody even knew who this guy was. Not even George Reeves. So very nice of Lemon to let a girl in her undies and then a stranger into their house. For the record, you are apparently looking at the only known photograph of Bliss. So mysterious. His friends called him Bill, though. Is he an employee with Lookout Mountain or some other government agency? We'll apparently never know, will we? As the police never thought to include a key witness in their investigation. I mean, if I'm ever off in the middle of the night and you hear about a mystery man who conveniently lives around the block and entered my home because the porch light was on, there's your first clue. Now that our agents are all in place, we are told that Reeves came downstairs, agitated at the noise from his late night callers, and in no mood for a party. Because, Bill Bliss was a wild and crazy guy, apparently. The date was June 16th, and the time read 1:20. We are told everyone at the get together was already sloshed and that they were too incoherent to make statements to the buttons. They must have arrived drunk then, because if I'm doing the math right, they'd only been drinking George's booze for 20 minutes or less. Must have been guzzling the bourbon like a fish or something. Reeves threatened to throw Bliss out, but eventually both apologized, shared a drink, and then parted as best buddies. He's going upstairs to shoot himself, Lemon told the other three. Yes, she really said that. No, I am not making this stuff up. Work with me here. A noise was almost immediately thereafter heard in Reeves' room, in which Lemon added, see, he's opening the drawer to get the gun. Then a shot rang out, and Miss Lemon exclaimed, see there, I told you, he shot himself. What the huh? From this point onward, the story fractures into several parallel dimensions, depending upon who is telling it, typical of crisis actors. We hear about Lemon, Condon, Bliss, and Van Ronkel all inhabiting the same room at the same time of the incident, and yet Condon and Van Ronkel somehow end up naked in bed together, needing rescued. Bill Bliss later told Millicent Trent that he was himself helping himself to the booze when, alternatively, Leonore Lemon came running downstairs seconds after the shot rang out and exclaimed, tell them I was down here. Tell them I was down here. Who is Millicent Trent, and why would Agent Bliss be speaking with her about somebody else's death? I'm glad you asked. Millicent Trent knew a thing or two about suicide. Millicent Patrick, born Mildred Elizabeth Fulvia de Rossi, there's another long name for you, finally becoming a Trent through marriage, was a Disney animator and a Hollywood costume designer. Her most notable work being the iconic Gilman costume for Creature from the Black Lagoon. Other special effects and makeup work of hers includes It Came from Outer Space, Abbott and Costello Meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and The Mole People. But long before that, her father was superintendent of construction at Hearst Castle in San Simeon. In fact, the Wikipedia has Millicent Trent growing close with Hearst's wife, Millicent Hearst. Confused as to why they're both named Millicent? I am too. The only difference in spelling is that Hearst's wife is given two L's rather than one. All we are told is that Millicent Hearst inspired the name change. Intel knows I like to read their articles. The wiki is dropping a challenge and leaving me to ponder over the implications. The Wikipedia seeks to further antagonize me by stating that she met her first husband, Paul Fitzpatrick, while working at Walt Disney Studios, and then reads, Fitzpatrick was married and they began an affair that was discovered by Fitzpatrick's wife, who later committed suicide when Fitzpatrick refused to stop seeing Rossi. Fitzpatrick was free to remarry. Millicent was given another name change, Mill Fitzpatrick. Then they divorced. The next name change saw her as Millicent Patrick, in which she had a relationship with the voice actor Frank L. Graham in 1950, but soon thereafter killed it. You see what I did there? According to the wiki, several weeks after she ended the relationship, Graham killed himself at his home. There is a point to this little exercise. At least somebody can vouch for the existence of Bill Bliss. I put George Glass in there from the Brady Bunch. Cross that out. And that person is the woman with a penchant for suicidal relationships and a dozen different name variations. Her favorite being a Hearst. But back to the murder suicide paradox. The Bill Bliss version has Leonore Lemon going upstairs at 1:30 to retrieve his Luger from the bed drawer while George was occupied in the shower. When George entered the room, he wrestled for his life, but she still managed to plonk a couple of rounds off into the floor. Nobody heard those two. The third, which Bill Bliss heard but the naked couple failed to hear, did him in. One spin-off timeline sees Lemon capable of climbing out the bedroom window and returning into the house through some other door so as to convince everyone present that she wasn't up there. Not to mention the other parallel dimension, whereas Lemon cracks a series of jokes about her fiance killing himself and then he does it. Yet another version has Bill Bliss waiting for his opportune moment. After shooting Reeves with a single shot to the head, he escapes out the upstairs window and back into the house without anybody else noticing. There is still yet another variation, which has an unknown assailant and associate of Bliss sneak into the back while Bliss occupied the others. That's probably it. In either tale, Libman waited nearly an hour to call the police. She then told investigators she was only kidding when she made the remarks about Reeves' plan to kill himself. Say it ain't so. The next person to arrive at Reeves' 1579 Benedict Canyon home was Polly Adler, a Russian Jew and infamous bordello owner, who was described for us as a longtime friend of Leonore Lemon and Robert Condon during their New York City days. Must have arrived to see Lemon's fiance off. Wish him luck, that sort of thing. Polly Adler opened her first bordello in 1920 under the protection of Dutch Schultz, a friend of mobster Charles Lucky Luciano. So nice of him. If the Copernican revolution taught me anything, it's that the realm may be flat and motionless, but love makes the world spin around. Another nice pairing of persons were architects from the firm of Schwartz and Gross, having completed the Majestic at 215 West 75th Street for Polly in 1924. The Majestic was conceived as a brothel, complete with hidden stairways and secret doorways. There are naysayers as to the intents of Schwartz and Gross's design, claiming that the hidden stairways and secret doorways were in actuality fire escapes, sure, but you and I know better. Funny how they were kept secret and hidden from the police during raids. Had there been an actual fire, the police would have been screwed. Also, even the raids are awkwardly staged when clientele includes New York City Mayor Jimmy Walker and the New York State Supreme Court Justice Joseph Forrest Carter. I'm sure Walker and Carter simply wanted to appreciate architecture with an added adventure in the case of an emergency. Actually, Carter was missing on August 6, 1930, never to be found again. It is thought that he was admiring the nicely crafted building at 215 West 75th Street, but from within. Must have gotten lost behind the bookshelf. Further clientele included cartoonist Peter Arno. He contributed 99 covers to The New Yorker from 1925, the magazine's premier year, until his death in 1968. His father was Curtis Arno Peters, a New York State Supreme Court judge. The founder of The New Yorker was Harold Wallace Ross, and he was a frequent visitor. So was New Yorker columnist and film actor Robert Benchley, George S. Kaufman, visitor, Milton Berle, visitor, John Garfield, visitor, Dorothy Parker was a Rothschild, and she was a frequent guest. But then again, even Kaufman, Burrell, and Garfield, like Parker, were Jews. We find one more breadcrumb trail leading to Desilu Studios with Desi Arnaz, as he was also an admirer of buildings, particularly the Majestic. It's like I've always said, if you're going to make a quick escape unseen by the buttons, best to call Polly up on the phone. That's why Leonore Lemon dialed her digits, to get the naked people out. According to Adler, Lemon said, "You have to get Bobby out of the house. He's in bed with a friend of mine who's married." That was the lady walking the poodle in her nightgown. You will recall that Bobby and Carol were actively sleeping in bed when the gunshot went off, leaving only Bliss and Lemon in the same room, or simply Bliss by himself, or perhaps even all four of them together, depending on what version floats your boat. Long story. Polly soon arrived, being in the neighborhood, conveniently, as she and her car were reportedly seen at the house that night, but then left before the Buttons arrived and without Bobby. She came, she left, probably unimportant. Police Chief William Parker later recalled, "Everyone in the house was very drunk. It was difficult to determine just who all had been in the house that night." Preach it, brother. You can say that again. Well, he's not my brother. Somebody's lodge brother, likely, just not my own, as I am not a Freemason. I guess I just got a little overly excited at the confessional. Or did Parker manage a Freudian slip? Either way, we've seen this before with the Manson murders when there were 25 fingerprints at the Polanski house and nobody to claim them. That's a telltale sign that the boys down at the lab are setting up, or in this case, taking down the set. What are the chances that Polly Adler drove off with the man of the hour? And we read this. Parker became police chief on August 9th, 1950, and is credited with transforming the LAPD into a world renowned law enforcement agency. The department that he took over in 1950 was notoriously corrupt. Say it ain't so. Seeing seeing ward politics with its heavy involvement by partisan groups in the police department and mingling of political circles with vice and corruption on the streets led him to conclude that a differently organized police force was necessary to keep the peace. Parker became LAPD chief some 9 years earlier on August 9th, 1950. The Wikipedia credits him with transforming the LAPD into a world renowned law enforcement agency, adding, as I just read, the department that he took over in 1950 was notoriously corrupt. You're probably wondering how he managed to clean it up then. It's a long broom and dustpan story, but it involves Parker's partnership with Hollywood and a television show called Dragnet. You may have heard of it. Chief Parker not only promoted the show, but supplied Dragnet creator Jack Webb with access to police files. Parker is also listed as a producer of the Thin Blue Line panel show, which aired weekly on NBC in 1952. I'm sure that's where their partnership ended, though. That was sarcastic. The guy smoking the stogie in the straitjacket is Theodore J. Uh, Kirby, Reeves coroner. Curfew was elected Nassau County Medical Examiner in December of 1937. That would be Long Island. By 1957, Kirby made the move and became the first coroner of Los Angeles County. You may want to hold on to something, preferably toilet paper, because Kirby was also the chief coroner for Marilyn Monroe. Dun dun dun. Don't say I didn't warn you. On August 7th, 1962, 2 days after her departure, it is Kirby who announced that a massive overdose of barbiturates was the kiss of death. He later said that she had lethal doses of both nimbutal or chlorohydrate, and she could have been killed by either. But you and I know better. Marilyn Monroe was a dude. Following in his footsteps as LA's second coroner was an even bigger hoaxer, Thomas Noguchi. Had a hand in the Marilyn Monroe disappearing trick, but then oversaw the autopsies of Albert Decker, Robert F. Kennedy, Sharon Tate, Janis Joplin, Inger Stevens, Gia Scala, David Jansen, William Holden, Natalie Wood, and John Belushi. In addition to the awkward fact that Reeves killed himself while a party raged on downstairs and he lay in bed naked, hot and steamy from his shower, Kirby did not think it necessary to perform his autopsy until after the body was embalmed. I'm sorry, washed. The body was washed, but that's probably unimportant. Being incapable of testing for powder traces on his hand and head wound has nothing to do with his decision, I'm sure. You'd think there would be something of the sort present if they were to judge he had shot himself at close range, but no. Testing a blood alcohol content of 0.27 was clearly enough to match up his story with the press. We are only shown one autopsy photo, but never an exit wound. They tell us the top of his skull was removed. We'll have to take their word for it. Looks like they cleaned up his entry wound real nice for the coffin photo shoot, though. He would then be cremated, but not for another few years. Really, if you need anyone bought and paid for, then Kirby sounds like the perfect candidate for a coroner. Unfortunately, he's dead if anyone is looking to disappear. Jack Larson does his very best to include himself in the murder suicide of Superman psyop by placing his whereabouts in the 1579 Benedict Canyon drive home only a day or two afterwards. Jimmy Olsen is on the case. The catch here being that Superman's pal arrives secretly with the old girlfriend, Tony Mannix, because that's something which Larson and Mannix did, apparently. They paired up together to solve crimes and stuff. Upon entering the home, Larson places the bloody sheets in the upper room bathtub, whereas others claim they'd ended up in the washer. Interesting. Tell us more. He then said he turned around and saw Mannix on her hands and knees investigating two bullet holes in the floor. So, how many bullet holes is that now? The police report has the bullet that killed Reeves lodged in the ceiling, despite Reeves laying on his back with his feet on the floor. Also, the shell was found underneath Reeves' body while the pistol was discovered at his feet. Do me a favor and read that last sentence several times over, trying to make sense of it. I still haven't. Uh, Noel, I guess her name is Noel, kind of like my name Noel, but Noelle Neal played Lois Lane in the television show, and she claimed there were far more than three bullet holes. She says, "You only hear about the 4 or 5 in the floor." Wait, there's 4 or 5? Wait, I thought there were only 2. And then she says, "But there were many others that were in the walls." I had a friend whose husband was later hired to repair the drywall in George's bedroom. He said the place was literally riddled with bullet holes. Well, there's that then. So many bullet holes. It must have been the St. Valentine's Day massacre up there. Amazing how nobody heard the ruckus. Must have used silencers. Then again, George Reeves had reason for ending it after all. As a writer and artist for DC Comics and all around comic book editor, Frederick Whitney Ellsworth had switched producing duties with The Adventures of Superman for a brand new spin off series called The Adventures of Super Pup, which sought to place the Superman mythos into a world populated by pooches. Had the series aired, live action actors in dog suits portraying canine versions of Superman. I can't even read this. I'm sorry. Canine versions of Superman and other characters would have weekly viewers howling with laughter. It never aired. Bummer. Leonore Lemon never stuck around for the memorial service. Classy girl. She did, however, return to the house after the police were gone, seeking out food and booze. Also, to retrieve the traveler's checks which Reeves had written his name upon. Reeves probably just forgot them on his way out. She then left town and returned to New York for good. Perhaps Tijuana was code word for Manhattan after all. Who really knows anymore? We are told the police never questioned nor asked her to testify because she had ties with Mickey Cohen and had been out on a date or two with Jimmy Hoffa. I know, right? Ridiculous. I'm no police detective, but I would think George Reeves' call girl fiance having close connections with the Jewish mob would be an excellent reason to find her number in the phone book and ask the hard questions. But no, Mickey Cohen just keeps popping up in these intel psyops, don't he? Spooks all swim in the same circles, and also Cohen once described Tony Mannix as the only person in Hollywood who had any balls. Wowzers. Years later, gossip columnist Edward Lawsey claimed to have insider's knowledge about the crime after overhearing Tony Maddox confess on her deathbed to a priest that Eddie had Reeves killed. More MK Ultra gossip, is it? It's like I've always said, if you're going to confess your deepest, darkest secrets to a Catholic priest, be sure to bring along the Hollywood gossip columnist. And I guess that concludes it. So thank you everybody for hanging in there with me tonight, and hopefully that was informative to you. And if I sounded like I had a fun time writing it, is because I did, because I was just going through my notes and just finding the whole situation so ridiculous. And the defense rests. I hand it over to the jury. That is it for the night. Thank you, everybody.